Welcome to Careers Unwrapped, where we delve into real-life career stories from successful people who've been through it all, the ups and the downs. We'll get their raw, honest, actionable advice and be the careers talk they wish they'd had when they started out. As someone who has had a varied career, from soldier to salesman, expedition leader to entrepreneur, he knows firsthand that your career doesn't always lead you where you expect it to. Here's your host, Mark Fawcett.
So, hello and welcome back to Careers Unwrapped. I'm your host, Mark Fawcett, and with me today is Joe Seddon. Now, Joe is an entrepreneur who set up his business Zero Gravity straight out of university. He's raised millions in investment to scale his business. He's been recognized in the Forbes 30 under 30 list. He's received the Social Impact Award from the Prime Minister. He's also a school governor. He is a charity trustee. He's an investor in his own right. And Joe's going to be talking candidly about how he fits all that in, but also about his career highs, his lows, what he's learned along the way, and hopefully offering advice to any budding entrepreneurs. So, Joe, welcome to the show.
Great to be on, Mark. Thanks for inviting me.
Joe, your titles really at the moment, or what you are at the moment, you're a chief executive and a founder, but people are always interested to know, what does that mean you actually do? What's in your in tray or your inbox for the week ahead?
Sure. So running a startup is really interesting because one day can go from the very glamorous to the very unglamorous, and then within a couple of hours. So today, for instance, recording this podcast, right now we've used sort of tell the Zero Gravity brand story to the world. But before this, I had a client call and a call with our accountant and an R&D credit consultant to go through this year's R&D tax credits. And then early this morning, we had the company all hands where we spoke to our entire team about where we are as a business, our current strategic priorities, KPIs. So it's a very mixed and varied day, but I would say there's a really big difference between being a CEO and being a founder. And this is a journey I've been on over 4 years. So when I founded Zero Gravity, there was me in my student bedroom. I had no resources, and it was a completely bootstrapped business where it felt a little bit like, me against the world. And in that day, I was a true unadulterated founder. I essentially did everything. Set the vision, set the strategy, got the brand out there, built the product, sent the emails, did the social media accounts. You do everything. And that's what it means to be a founder. Like you're both strategizing and executing at the same time. And over the past 4 years, as we've raised investment, got the business working, grown the team, I've morphed into a bit more of a chief executive role where I'd spend a lot of time nowadays hiring people, setting the strategy, the vision, coaching other people within the business, try and get results through other people. And that was a really big learning curve for me personally, because I never actually had a proper job before. Like I had no idea how to build a team, how to manage people, how to motivate them. So I had to sort of learn all of that by trial and error. And as someone who was naturally an introvert and had been used to being part of an education system, which is all focused on me, individual performance, not about succeeding as a group. It was a really big change in style I had to go through to sort of thinking, actually, how do I get results through others? How do I translate my vision into something that other people can then go away and take and use from themselves and create the right culture for people to thrive in? And I think that's a really big challenge that a lot of founders have to go through. And there is no kind of manual or book you can read to learn how to do that. You just have to learn by doing.
I've got such tremendous respect for people who start their own business at the age and time that you did. I started my business in my mid to late 30s, which gave me the advantage of having been in other working environments in both leadership positions and being led by others. And so I could take a little bit of each of those and learn from it. But doing it straight out of university it's tough. I think to give us a bit of context, it would probably be useful to hear directly from the founder's voice what Zero Gravity is and what you do.
Sure. So before I sort of talk about what Zero Gravity does, I'll sort of start with the why behind the business, why found the business in the first place straight out of university. So my story is, I grew up in a small town in West Yorkshire called Morley, which is just outside Leeds. I was a sort of single parent, a family, attended state schools, and saw firsthand just how big barriers were for young people like me to break into elite institutions. I managed to get a place at Oxford University, which was completely crazy thing to happen for someone like me from the backgrounds that I was from. In the year I graduated, not a single person from my local constituency in Morley, won a place at Oxford University, which just sort of shows how sort of dramatic it was for someone in that area to go to a place like that. And I sort of became very passionate about trying to find a way to level the playing field in the UK, try and untether that link that everyone knows about between backgrounds and the opportunities you're exposed to. And whilst I was at university, I saw all these incredible technology businesses, transform every single facet of my life, whether it was Facebook changing the way me and my friends communicated, to the Uber, changing the ways you can get around big cities, or Deliveroo getting sushi to your desk in 20 minutes. And I thought, if technology can solve some of those really big problems, now why can't technology be used to break down those barriers that prevent talented young people from normal backgrounds getting into elite institutions? And that is where Zero Gravity was born from. We're a tech platform that identifies top talent from no opportunity backgrounds and powers them into top universities and careers. So that was the kind of mission behind the business. It's a genuine mission-driven organization. I didn't start this organization to try and make loads of money, but I did want to solve a really big social problem. And I thought the best way to do that was with a tech startup approach, trying to learn from some of those things which tech businesses had done, many of whom had just focused on the how do we make loads of money for shareholders. I wanted to leverage some of those same approaches to try and solve a social problem as old as society itself.
And so you didn't actually study a tech-based degree at Oxford. So you weren't a techie, a coder, yet you went in to actually establish a tech-based business. In a practical sense, how did you go about doing that?
Sure. So I studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford, which is probably more famous for creating failed politicians than it is tech startup founders. But I was a techie in the sense that when I was growing up in Morley in West Yorkshire, and I was obsessed with technology. It sounds cliche, but I remember when Steve Jobs unveiled the first iPhone and watching that online and just being blown away. I sort of became obsessed with what was going on in Silicon Valley, which is quite a strange thing for someone from West Yorkshire to be obsessed with what's going on around 5,000 kilometers away on the other side of the Atlantic. And I'd sort of taught myself to code at the age of 13. I was really engaged in the tech ecosystem. So I've had some of that understanding of this tech startup landscape there. I had some of the practical skills to be able to get my business off the ground in terms of I knew how to buy a domain name, get web hosting set up, build your first website, build a very basic application. I was by no means an expert, but I was able to get off the ground. And I think for many young founders, the blunt truth is if you start a business bootstrapped with no resources, in the early days, you do have to learn and pick up lots of skills to be able to get your business running. Now, when you are a true founder, you have to execute across all sorts of different things and almost be the kind of consummate generalist. And it's only when your business gets bigger that you can then start to think about what are the things that I'm really, really good at that other people can't match me at. And you lean into those things and hire people who can take the other stuff from you, who are true experts in that field. But in the early days, unfortunately, you have to learn a lot of skills.
And so what was the first role, the first person you hired into the business?
I hired another generalist. So the first hire I made at Zero Gravity, and she's still working for Zero Gravity today, was someone called Rebecca. And she was a graduate from Cambridge University. She did a degree in classics, but she was really interested in tech startups. And she was an all-rounder. She'd done a bit of marketing before. She'd done a little bit in product, done a bit in operations. And in the early days, and we worked very much as a duo, executing across the entire business. So I think at the beginning, when you grow something, you almost want to find more people like you, the more people who can do a little bit of everything. They share your vision for the business, they buy into the same values that you buy into. But once you sort of get past your first 4 or 5 people, that's when you want to start to specialize and you work, what are those really tricky challenges in my organization that you need a real expert to solve? So for instance, when we made our 4th hire as a business, that was our chief technology officer. And that came from the idea that I'd taken the sort of platform as far as I could take it as a specialist in that field. And now we needed someone with the real expertise in software engineering and growing a tech platform to take that forward. But it took us around 2-3 years to get to that point. You can go much further than you realize just by self-learning skills. So it's definitely difficult starting a business no bootstraps, no without access to friends and family funding, but it's by no means impossible if you're willing to really engage with some of the skills you need to get going.
And you mentioned funding there, and part of your backstory is the funds that you have raised to get the business flying. What was the first fundraise you did, and how did you go about getting to the market and saying, I want some of your money, this is what we're trying to do?
Sure. So when I was growing up, I used to listen to all these Silicon Valley podcasts. So I kind of knew how tech startups worked. I knew they raised funding to be able to grow the business, before revenues, came in, and that you'd have your, seed round, Series A round, Series B rounds. They're the jargon that's sort of thrown around in the industry that doesn't really make any sense when you think about it, but it's the terms people use day to day. But when I started Zero Gravity and then moved down to London, I didn't really have any network in the tech startup space. I didn't have a group of investors I could go to try and raise money for the business. So I had to get pretty creative. And the thing I really focused on in the early days was growing our brand awareness through both organic social media and then earned sort of traditional media. I was lucky that because of the really clear mission behind Zero Gravity and some of the really sort of emotionally resonant success stories that came out of the platform in the early days, our story got picked up by a lot of the traditional media outlets, BBC News, The Times, The Telegraph. And from that, I started having investors that come to me, people who'd seen my business online, seen it profiled and thought, wow, this is a really innovative idea. And using technology to try and solve the social problem. I want to find out more about this. And then from that, I built my network from there. It was almost like a domino effect. If I look at our current the list of shareholders, we've got around 30 shareholders in the business. All of them I can kind of trace back almost in a spider's web to 2 or 3 people who got in touch in the early days. And that's the thing about networks. It's really difficult to start them and get them going. But once you build a big enough network, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's going to scale and become bigger and bigger and bigger just through the sheer scale of the people that you know. So there's that famous Arnold Palmer quote about golf, which is the more I practiced, the luckier I got. And the same, I think, is true for networks. So the bigger a network you start to build, the more you get lucky in terms of the right people just tend to gravitate towards you. And that is in many ways how I built the shareholder register at Zero Gravity to where it is today.
Yeah, I think the networking piece is often under promoted to people when they're starting out in their careers, but of critical importance. And as you said, it can start turning itself after a while, and people will make an effort to introduce you to others who can help. And whether that's for fundraising or for sales or for building client bases, networking can be so important. But you started this without that network, without the natural network that many people might have on their side when they start a business, partly, I guess, because of your background and partly because of your age. How natural or comfortable did you find it networking, reaching out to strangers and selling them a story?
Yeah, I've always thought networking was a little bit of a dirty concept where I started. And I'm from Yorkshire, where everyone's very sort of direct and blunt, and no one wants to be that person sort of in the pub, telling everyone about their business. And I used to think networking was very American, a little bit, dirty and fake. I was a little bit of a cynic about it, but I kind of realized that's just one form of networking, and that's your kind of conventional, networking event. And sometimes those events can be a little bit like that, but network doesn't have to be a dirty phrase. And unfortunately, that the nature of the modern world is it's a world dominated by networks, whether it's the social media platforms you use every day or the businesses you use, Deliveroo and Uber, those businesses I mentioned at the start, fundamentally networks. They're underpinned by networks and delivery drivers and taxis and customers. And if you're not someone who's proactive about building a network, it's very difficult to succeed in this modern world. So it required a bit of a mindset change from myself, but I just kind of got used to sort of getting out there, speaking to new people, sliding into people's LinkedIn DMs and doing things that I initially thought were unproductive. I used to think it was unproductive to take an hour away from developing a tech platform to go meet someone. But I actually realized, especially if you're a young founder and inexperienced and you don't have direct access to things like investment and clients for your business, spending an hour building your network can often yield results that are far more than spending an hour researching online or with your head stuck in a coding problem, because you're tapping to people who've got more resources than you. And your youth in many ways is a competitive advantage when building a network because humans instinctively want to help younger people. There's almost like that, I presume it must be some like evolutionary part of our psyche, which is we want to kind of rear the next generation to succeed. And you can really tap into that as a young person to get access to people who you would never think you'd be able to get access to. Why not DM that person on LinkedIn who's a famous entrepreneur and tell them about your story, tell them why you want a little bit of their time. And if you're a 21, 22-year-old, you've got a far higher chance of getting a response than if you were 50 or 60 years old. So you've really got to double down on that advantage whilst you've got it, because if you really get that lift off point as a young person in terms of building a network, it's going to continue to grow and serve you for the rest of your life.
I think that's so important. People are often surprised at how willing other people are to help, especially people who may be 15, 20, even 30 years into their career. And if you reach out and say, can I have a coffee? Can we have a conversation? Can you help me with some advice? Far more than you think they'll come back with a yes. And then your network's growing from there. So just going back to you starting up again, what did those first 4 or 5 months feel like from a personal or even an emotional perspective rather than from a business perspective?
It was a really big decision to launch a startup because I had job offers at the end of university to go work in a law firm, go work in a hedge fund, and the quantums of money which were being offered by some of those firms were mind blowing for someone like me from West Yorkshire. And I turned them all down, and my friends and even my family thought I was completely crazy and nuts for doing that. And there was a huge degree of skepticism about what I was doing at the beginning, because I think in the UK, there is still a very underdeveloped culture around entrepreneurship. There may be in certain parts of London that's changed, but in most of the UK, if you start a business, until you get to the point where you kind of have the external trappings of success, you're going to face a lot of skepticism from people around you, because I think people in the UK just aren't used to the concept of people starting something up for themselves. And there is not that culture around the acceptance of failure. And our entire education system teaches people to try and avoid failure and not embrace it. And I think that mentality also carries through into the business world as well. So there was a huge degree of skepticism about what I was doing. I'd moved back to West Yorkshire to my childhood bedroom to start the business, whilst all my friends moved to their nice grad jobs in London and started sort of enjoying the high life of living in a really dynamic city. So personally, it was actually really difficult those first 6 months because I had no resources. I'd moved back home. I was dislocated from a lot of my friends at university. There was skepticism from my social circles about what I was doing, whether it was a good idea, taking the more conventional route forward. And growing a business from the ground up, completely bootstrapped, is super, super tough, because you can do things on a shoestring, but it takes far longer. And then when you've got to learn all of those skills you need to grow, then that takes time and energy. And constantly you're fighting the battle of not having resources, having to do things on a shoestring, cobbled together, and they're not in the most perfect, beautiful way you'd want to do it. And what I kind of learned from that process about what it takes to succeed, I think is 3 key things. I think one is about focus. I think every entrepreneur, especially first-time entrepreneurs, they have a big vision, a big idea. They want to bring that to reality and to take over the world. And that is a really good ambition to have. But you have to kind of tame that vision and instinct based on the amount of resources you've got, and just focus really clearly on achieving a few set goals. It's better to 100% a couple of things rather than 15% everything. And one of the mistakes I've seen a lot of young founders make is they get carried away with just the scale of their vision and they spread themselves too thinly. So you've got to think really strategically, what are those first few things I'm going to focus on? I'm going to ignore everything else. I'm going to focus on a couple of key things. And then once I've achieved those things, I'm going to go into my next thing and next thing. So find those couple of things and almost build your kind of milestones, like your journey that you're going to go on. And for me, what that looked like is I built the brand initially, and I tried to get people interested in what I was doing. And then I built the tech platform, and then I tried to build media coverage of what I was doing. And then I tried to get investments. So I kind of went on a stepping stone journey. I didn't do all those things at once. Over the course of 6 months, I went on a stepping stone journey in order to do those things. That was the first sort of big lesson that I learned. I think the second lesson about starting a business from the ground up is you've got to be audacious. Ultimately, Like, it's incredibly random starting a small business. Now, you can try loads of different things, and things that you think are going to work don't end up working. I mean, you get little bits of luck that come out of nowhere, but you only get those little bits of luck from putting yourself out there. That you might email, 100 journalists, and 99 of them aren't interested in your business or giving you any coverage. But eventually you get that one person who resonates with your business. There's a particular angle they want to go down. When you get that one article, and from that, all of the rest of your media coverage builds, because everyone then starts to jump on the train. So the only way you can get into that process is by being audacious and refusing to give up. And you've got to understand that as a small business, the odds are stacked against you. It's supposed to feel hard. The people watch these movies of these overnight successes, like I've seen like The Social Network with Jesse Eisenberg playing Mark Zuckerberg, and that kind of presents Facebook as some kind of overnight success. But even a great business like Facebook, it took months and months to get off the ground. That was originally built out a college dorm room, and they jumped across different college campuses, flying up students before it became a global platform. So it's supposed to feel hard growing an early stage startup. Your success won't happen overnight, and there's a huge degree of randomness. And you've got to work that randomness to your favor by being really audacious about chasing down opportunities. And the final point I would make is that the route of raising investment for your startup doesn't have to be something which is off the table. If you are someone from a normal background, it's much, much easier to start if you have that rich uncle you can go to get a £50,000 investment in your company. But if you're not someone from that background, be proactive about building a network. Look at the grant funding that's available online nowadays for diverse founders. Really utilize your story about someone from an unconventional background to build interest in what you're doing. But you can turn what is classically a disadvantage into an advantage if you position it in the right way. And that's something that I did as well. So getting investment for your business doesn't have to be off the table if you're not from a rich background.
I think the 3 points you've made there and the way you articulate them just sounds so familiar in a way to some of my own experiences, but just a few more years ago, because you started so young. And the focus, especially, and being audacious, being brave, how much underneath the surface were you feeling confident the whole way through this? Or were there points at which you thought, this is going to fail, or I'm a bit of an imposter in this world?
Yeah, I always sort of had the lingering doubt in the back of my mind, like you can call it imposter syndrome if you want to, but I'd never been a tech startup before. I had no credibility as a business founder. I was facing all that social skepticism. So I did have lingering doubts in the back of my head about, actually, is this ever going to work? And am I just wasting my time? Or should I quit this right now and go and take a conventional office job? So I had those lingering doubts, but I also had a kind of, like you might call it delusion or naive optimism, that I genuinely thought that my vision and the way I saw the world in the space I was in was fundamentally correct. I thought that I'd just do this long enough and keep going and keep focused. Eventually I'll have that breakthrough moment. And that did come for me eventually, but it took around 6 months to get there. And then that 6 months prior to it, there was many times I thought about quitting, to be completely honest. And that's a natural psychological experience to go through as a founder. You're going to get caught up in moments of pure ecstasy as you see your product come to life, and also moments of just pure despair as things that you thought were going to work don't work, and then you run into surprises that you could never quite anticipate. And the question is, how do you get through that? I think there's only two things. Either you have to be a crazy, resilient person and sort of so passionate and almost deluded, naively optimistic in your vision that you can just get through any obstacle. And often that comes from backgrounds. Now, if you are somebody who is from a normal background, or you have struggled with childhood trauma in whatever way it may be, difficult family, difficult time at school, those experiences will actually power you forward in terms of creating that inner drive. And I think the second thing is building a network of supporters around you. Now, building a network isn't just about getting access to hard resources like money, connections, advice. It can be soft things as well, which is when you've had a bad day, you've had a bad week, there's someone you can turn to and have a conversation about that. And that's not just them advising you how you can get out of that problem. That's them just being there to listen to you. And especially if they're another founder, they can also reflect on their own experiences and let you know that you're not alone, because founding a business can be a very lonely experience if you're a solo founder, that everything feels like it's on your shoulders the entire time. So just having other people you can go and talk to about those things can also really make the difference as well.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to the way you describe it, because it actually sort of triggers emotions in me that I remember from a time ago. My business almost went bust twice. I didn't have a partner at work. I was married, so I had a partner in my life, which was hugely important to me. But there was nobody I could really turn to when I was thinking we're going to have to close this down and get rid of people who I'd hired. So that is very familiar in the way you're describing it. And when you look back at those earlier years, are there pieces now that you think, I would do that differently with the benefit of experience and hindsight?
Yeah, everything looks scientific in retrospect. And then when you look back 4 years, you can kind of trace your journey through and the things that really make a difference. And then you thought, oh, maybe I should have done this earlier or that earlier. It's very easy to look at that in retrospect. Very difficult to get it right at the time. I think the biggest mistakes I made were probably being often too slow and too timid about certain things. I think I probably should have moved down to London quicker to try and build a network to raise investment for what I was doing. I probably took 3 months too long to do that. I think I also should have been more aggressive in our hiring plans as well, potentially. I was such almost a control freak at the beginning about my business. I'd grown it from the ground up, and I felt a huge degree of nervousness about then bestowing that to other people to run various parts of it. And that's a thing you need to mentally unblock as a founder. That you need to think so deeply about hiring, recruitment, and what sort of people do you want. They live the culture and sort of values of your organization, but you do need other people to be able to succeed. And no business can grow as a one-man band. So I think I would have thought far earlier, actually, that how can I accelerate what I'm doing through other people rather than focusing so much on myself and what I could do personally to drive the business. And that is now part of my day-to-day job role. I'm constantly thinking about how can I facilitate other people, but it took me around 3 years to get to that point. And that's something now in hindsight, I look back and I'm thought, no, I should have tried to build those skills earlier. But at the end of the day, I was also a 21, 22-year-old at the time as well, who had absolutely no idea what he was doing. So even building those skills was something that just never occurred to me when I was that age. But if I could go back and speak to my younger self, that is probably what I'd tell him.
Now, one key aspect, obviously, of what you do at Zero Gravity is help people who don't necessarily come from the traditional backgrounds that went to the elite universities to actually get into those elite universities. And one of the questions I've been given by one of our listeners specifically for you is that you clearly believe going to university and academia is very important in helping you excel in your career. To what extent do you believe other routes are equally valid, or that they are more relevant for some people than university? So where do your thoughts lie around going to university versus taking other routes?
Sure. I'm by no means a fetishist about universities. And ultimately, Zero Gravity is about unlocking opportunity for people from low opportunity backgrounds by enabling them to reach their potential. And I think for a big group of people, that means going to university. But I think for others, university isn't necessarily the right choice. The way we look at things is we look at how does going to these elite institutions facilitate what you ultimately want to achieve. And one thing that a lot of people from low opportunity backgrounds care about is money. Because if you grow up in a background where money is incredibly scarce, being able to get to a point where you can generate an income and feel a sense of stability and security and then the ability to actually do things with money, that does really make a difference. It sounds quite crude, but money is really important if you don't have it. And so the way I kind of look at things is, does going to certain universities that increase your earning power throughout your life? And one of the things we know from the data is that going to a highly selective university, it does dramatically change your outcomes in the job market. And if you get an offer from a Russell Group university, versus a medium selective university in the UK, it boosts your lifetime earnings by £200,000 over your lifetime. If you get an offer for study at Oxbridge versus Russell Group University, that boosts it by an additional £200,000. So we know from the data that what university you go to can have a big impact on average on your lifetime earnings, which is why those really highly selective universities can still be a really good route for you to get better access to the job market and to really scarce the highly selective opportunities. But what we also know is there's lots of universities out that are no longer doing a good job in terms of giving access to the workplace and building those skills people need in their careers. So I'd encourage a lot of people to actually look at the data which is out there, and a lot of the apprenticeships which are offered nowadays by a lot of companies also have really good lifetime earning outcomes, better than many universities.
Yeah.
So we're not fetishists about universities, we're fetishists about outcomes. And ultimately, we want the members of our platform to choose what's right for them and the full knowledge of actually what going to those institutions gives them.
And Oxford and Cambridge have an almost sort of mystique about them in this country, even from people who went to other universities. What was the experience at Oxford actually like? What is it like being a student studying at that historical university?
Yeah, the both institutions have a massive place in British culture, and they're incredibly opaque, which has created this sort of magical notion around them. You still see all the sort of Harry Potter tours through the city as well, even nowadays. I think the thing that makes those two universities stand out probably is the power of culture. One of the things I've noticed going to Oxford is I turned up, and on Freshers Week, straight away, I was sort of told by the tutors who were there, you are the best of the best. And the people at this university have gone on to be prime ministers, leaders of countries, heads of businesses, and that is the expectation for everyone who is on this course. So you get told straight away that you're special and you have something about you. And then that sentiment is also reinforced by the new peer groups that you make as well, who are all people who are the high performers in their schools, who also believe what they've been told about their own abilities. That becomes self-reinforcing. And I do think that culture which university creates is very powerful because it builds people with a self-confidence in their own abilities and a huge degree of audacity as well. And the big issue those institutions have got is that historically, the people who frequented them have been people from a very affluent background, private schools in the UK, and they haven't been truly representative of the country. So I think the challenge for them is how can they become more representative of the UK whilst retaining some of the positive things about the institutions which have made them so successful historically. But the power of culture is a massive aspect of it, which I don't think is spoken about. Everyone knows about the great research resources of the university or the financial resources, the great tutors, the lecturers, but people don't talk about the cultural element of them as well, which is probably the biggest part of their success.
And you touched upon there a key aspect of what your business does in terms of tackling aspects of social mobility. And in this country, it's argued that perhaps where there were some efforts and successes being made to narrow the gaps between those who have and do not have at the start of their lives, COVID and some of the lockdowns and the impact that's had on education as well has arguably increased those gaps again. What are you seeing that's working in tackling social mobility in the UK, and also where is it failing?
Sure. I think one big question people have is poor social mobility unique to the UK, or is this something which is a global phenomenon? And the truth of that is that every big developed economy has a social mobility problem, but to different extent. In the UK, roughly 45% of every pound that you earn throughout your lifetime can be predicted by how much your parents earn when you were growing up. That's almost 1 in 2 pennies that you earn that can be attributed or predicted from your parents' earnings. And when you look at other countries around the globe, you see a similar picture, albeit the UK being much worse. And you look at comparable countries like Germany, it's more like 30% of everything you earn, Australia 25%. And then those Gandhi countries, as per usual, are topping the leaderboards, where more like 15% of what you earn in those countries can be predicted from your parents' earnings. So we do live in a society where what you go on to succeed is highly predictable from the background you're from. And when you look at other countries and you see, what is it about them that makes them more socially mobile compared to the UK? It tends to mainly come down to their education systems and the access to the workforce. And in the UK, we have an education system. We have these massive divides between the educational haves and the have-nots. And if you go to a really good private school or a state school in a leafy area, your academic outcomes now are far more likely to be positive than if you go to a underperforming state school in the UK in a low income area. And we just almost accept that as the status quo in the UK. But when you look at other developed economies, that the gaps in their education system are far smaller than ours. And if you go to somewhere like Denmark, for instance, and look at the attainment gap between the rich and the poor, it's far, far smaller than in the UK. And that is something that we can change. That doesn't have to be inevitable. I think the second thing is access to the workplace. The UK has a very highly stratified system behind getting access to professional jobs. Often you need to have done work experience, which is very difficult to get unless you can get it through family connections. It's also highly based on your grades in school and what you got when you were a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old in the education system. It's highly based on what university you go to. And if you go to one of those top universities in the UK, that opens doors for you. Again, we take all of this as the status quo, but in many other countries, that link between your grades in school, what university you go to, and then what careers you can access is much weaker than in the UK. And if you look at a country like Germany, for instance, going to a top university there is far less important in terms of access to top employment opportunities than it is in the UK. And that is a decision we've made about how we want to structure our society. And that's something I think we need to look at. Do we want to live in a world where going to a bad school means you've got a far less likely to get good grades? And if you do get bad grades, that kind of eliminates your chance breaking into a top career. Do we want to live in a system which is constructed like that? Because that's a system we've currently got. So UK is far behind some of our comparators on social mobility, and what zero gravity is trying to do is level the playing field by accepting that the system is the way it is, and the way to beat the system in the short term is to get a big critical mass of talented people from low opportunity backgrounds into these institutions. So once that they're there, they can change the culture and start to change the system from the inside.
And obviously some of the issues you've just mentioned are big macro issues. I mean, to change the education system in the country, which in my view, it needs changing. To change it, that requires government level intervention, obviously. And then there are businesses like yourself saying, actually, we're going to focus on a particular challenge that we believe we can do something with. What about, and this may be tricky, what about for the young people themselves? If you were speaking to a room full of people who don't have the advantages that others do, and we can say to them, this is what we want to do at a macro level, and this is what my business is doing. What can you do for yourself? What can they do for themselves to give them the best chance of stepping up and out of the situation that they've been brought up in?
I mean, if you want to change the system, often the best way you can do that is by turning yourself into a success. And that can be a slightly dark thing to think about, right? That you have to almost acclimatize and socialize yourself into the system in order to take it down. But I think that is the way to make change. If you're a young person and you think the system's unfair, you can go out onto the streets with a placard and try and make some noise. But by the time that the government has intervened and changed the system, it's going to be too late for you. It's probably going to be too late for the next generation as well. Government policy change takes a long time and is incredibly slow. The people have been talking about these issues in the UK for generations, and yet nothing has changed. So I'm not saying advocacy is not important, but the pace of change is slow. And what I think is a much quicker solution is to focus actually on how we beat the system and get to the top. And then once you're there, then think about how you can level the playing field for the next generation and become that person who manages to become the first person in that area to get a job at an elite law firm. They progress through the firm, mentor people from similar backgrounds like yourself, and they get to a partnership position and then revolutionize the way that firm recruits people to make sure you're tapping into talent from all background. We have enough people doing that. The system starts to change organically. And I started to see that when I was at Oxford. When I arrived in 2015, it was almost 50-50 state private school, massively representative of the country, where 93% of people go to state schools. But by the time I graduated, I'm even looking at nowadays, it's more like 70-30. And you can just tell that the culture of the university has started to change. And now there's far more applicants from people from normal backgrounds because they start to see the university as a place that people like them are represented, and they start to see it as a realistic option. And that happens just by thinking, really creatively about how do we get more people into Oxbridge. And nowadays, the Zero Gravity platform is driving 1 in 4 of all the diverse students at Oxbridge into those universities. So we've sort of created quite a big change in a short period of time. And that's not just great for the people themselves, but that has changed the culture. So if you are someone from a low income background, or you live in an area of the country which isn't usually represented in these institutions, you almost have a duty to make yourself a success, because your success is a beacon of hope for the next generation, and in and of itself levels the playing field.
I think what you said there about the culture at universities and within universities changing, what we see as well is the culture within businesses is changing, and they are seeking now a diverse set of experience and skills. They're much more focused on the skills you bring rather than the subjects that you have studied. And this has moved way beyond what might have been diversity tick boxing 5-10 years ago, when somebody says, actually, we're going to be a better business for this as well. So is that something you're seeing as well? And if so, is it moving fast enough? Is it moving in the right direction?
I've seen a massive change in the landscape over the past 5 years. I think 5 years ago, the social mobility was often a tokenistic tick box issue. Everyone cares about social mobility because it's about social justice, empowering talented people. But I don't think anyone really had an impetus to do anything about it. But then loads of evidence started coming out about that link between social mobility, diversity, and performance. And not just research at the macro level as well. There's always been studies showing the link between social mobility and economic growth. If we could just get social mobility in the UK to the same level as Western Europe, we'd add £39 billion to GDP. It's 1,000 in the pocket of every household every year if you can get social mobility to the same level as Western Europe. That's at the macro level. At the micro level, a lot of businesses now have done the research, and they found that actually some of their most productive, high performance people are the people from socially mobile backgrounds. They're the people who weren't given opportunity on a plate and had to fight to defy the odds. But once they did get into these firms, they had all of the raw talent, the resilience, the grit, determination to succeed. One of the first companies that Zero Gravity worked with were KPMG. They're one of our first clients, and they were the first business in the UK to put an explicit target on the number of people from working class backgrounds they wanted in their workforce. And the reason they did that wasn't just because it was the right thing to do, but because they've done a massive internal data analysis where they found, even though people from social mobile backgrounds progress slower within their company, the ones that do reach the very top were some of their most high-earning, productive partners. So it almost became a commercial imperative for them that we want to drive social mobility in our company because it's not just the right thing to do, but these people, they go on to become the big high earners in our company. And once the economic incentives are there, the things can start to change quite dramatically. You've seen it in the environmental sector as well. Tokenistic issue 20 years ago, massive growth driver now. The same is starting to happen for social mobility. So we're starting to work with a lot of these companies who now really want to drive more people from normal backgrounds into their workforces because it's good for their bottom line. It's not just good for their social impact. And I don't see that cynically. I see that as a positive thing because it actually creates an impetus for change.
Yeah. And we've obviously in this conversation unwrapped a lot of your career to date. It's still a very fresh, new and young career. What's happening next year? What are the plans and what are your own personal goals coming up?
Sure. So to date, Zero Gravity supported over 8,000 students from low opportunity backgrounds into top universities. This year, we've got a new cohort of 10,000 students on our platform applying to university. So hopefully I can report back to you that in a year's time that we've supported around 18,000 students into top universities. And that's just a real big scale up on our platform. And it kind of justifies the decision I made early doors to focus on building technology and a great product, because to be able to go from putting hundreds of people to now tens of thousands has only been made possible by having a tech platform that can really scale. So we're going to continue to scale the work we've done to get students into university. And we're working with more employers to change the way their recruitment system works and level the playing field. We've worked with companies like Morgan Stanley and KPMG, HSBC, and we're really starting to change now the success rates for people from low-income backgrounds applying for roles in those companies. With HSBC, we managed to double the rates of people from low-income backgrounds accessing their internships. And I want to start replicating those kind of figures in all the companies we work with, because they aren't just data points. If we can do that in all the big employers, we fundamentally change the game and get a different type of person working at these companies, and just the ripple effect that will have over time in terms of reshaping the culture of some of these institutions and the landscape in the UK, I think will be quite dramatic. So we are a very kind of data focused company, but the end result of that, I do think, is big culture system change. And that's what we're trying to make possible.
And what about beyond the success of both the business and the impact you're having? What about for you personally? You know, it's been obviously hard work. It's one thing that is often missed out in these stories, that you don't get this success without sheer hard graft. Is there anything personally you want to do less of, more of, better at yourself over the next year?
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind of a journey over the past 4 years, starting a business in the bedroom and then scaling it to 25 people, working full time in the office. I have to sort of pinch myself walking in some days. It was just, bubbled of activity around me, and I'm no longer in amidst everything. And there's people out there executing your vision. That would have seemed completely unfathomable only 4 years ago. I think personally, I'm really passionate about solving this issue. I don't want to tread water. And I want to build the kind of industry defining company in this sector that turns social mobility into a commercial imperative for every organization and actually solves with technology. In the same way that those businesses I referenced at the beginning, Deliveroo and Uber have become kind of synonymous with their sector. People will talk about getting an Uber when they say, I want to get a taxi, or they'll say, I want to get a delivery when they're talking about getting takeaway food. I want zero gravity to almost become the metaphor for unlocking opportunity if you're someone from a low income background. And that does require a huge degree of personal sacrifice. It's really difficult being a solo founder. It's stressful. You constantly don't have enough hours in the day. But this is something that I genuinely believe in and I'm passionate about, because it's a journey that I've lived myself, and I'm solving a problem for future people and like me. So I just want to keep going and growing this and turn it into that industry defining business. The only thing I want to make sure I've still got time for is to see my football team, Hull City, play at the weekend. That isn't one non-negotiable in my life. But other than that, it's all about zero gravity.
Well, look, Joe, thank you so much. One of the things we want to do on Careers Unwrapped is we want to keep passing this baton of careers experience along. And so I'm wondering if you could perhaps name for us one person who you think should come on this show, whose experience would be valuable for all of us to hear about from the perspective of their career journey.
Sure. I think somebody who would be really interesting and talk to, because he's also got a really unconventional journey, is actually one of the people who first helped me when I first started Zero Gravity. He's a founder of a business called Beam, which is a homelessness startup which uses crowdfunding and technology to break people out of homelessness. And then Alex Stephanie, the founder, was one of the first people I turned to when I was starting my business, Zero Gravity, because he was pioneering a tech startup approach in a space which has conventionally been dominated by charities and making a real impact. And so I think he'd be a really good person to talk to about employing unconventional techniques in different sectors. And also he's got a great story as someone who was originally a lawyer that really struggled in that career sector and then dropped out, thought he was never going to be able to work in a conventional career again, and then found himself pulled into this crazy world of tech startups. So I think he'd be a really interesting person to talk to, present a different perspective on getting into the startup industry.
Great. Thank you. We'll see if we can get him in. So much to take away from that altogether, Joe. I think that the 3 points you made about having focus, being audacious, and knowing about the routes to investment are a tick list that any startup founder could do well to bear in mind, underpinned by the networking and people aspect that you've brought out several times during this. It's been fantastic to hear your story, but also strange to think that it's only 4 or 5 years old as a story. And so there's going to be a lot more to come. It's been great. Joe, thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business, or organisation to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.